Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants in this side event to UNCITRAL's 55th Commission session, we are very grateful to those of you who are joining us from afar through a platform. We have almost lost the feeling of having remote participation because we are back in person in New York. But we are very glad for the availability and the interest to join this discussion panel. First of all, let me thank the permanent mission of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations, and particularly Ambassador Bae Jongjin, for hosting us today and for facilitating and organizing this side event to the Commission. I would also like to inform you at the outset that ASG Maria Francesca Spatolizano might be a bit late, so we will bring her into the session when she is able to join us from another meeting. And now I would simply like to put this side event into the broader context of UNCITRAL's Commission session and say how auspicious it is that this morning the Commission has adopted the Model Law on Identity Management and Trust Services, which is paving the way for further international cooperation and further accompanying the transition from electronic to digital trade. This conclusion by the Commission of the work also paves the way for new projects in the area of automated and autonomous contracting and data transactions, which are the next topics that we will be taking up in Working Group 4, and very much with the spirit and following the guidance given to us by the Commission session this morning that we should indeed liaise with the industry, but also with international organizations that are working in this area. And that is also very much in the DNA of UNCITRAL, which has at the core of its mandate. This is exactly what we are trying to convey by organizing and hosting this event today. So without further ado, because you're much more interested in listening to our panelists, I would give over the floor to Ambassador Bae Jongjin, Chargé d'Affaires of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations, for his welcoming words. Thank you, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. I would first like to express my appreciation to Madam Secretary for this opportunity to co-organize this event. And distinguished guests, digital technology has been rapidly transforming our way of life and is even creating a virtual world, which is often intertwined with our physical world. And the UN is addressing this issue at many settings to define and shape our global solutions. Cybersecurity in the first committee, cybercrime in the third committee, and the digital divide in the second committee, and ECOSOC and digital trade here at UNCITRAL. Among these, digital trade is unique in the sense that it is we can approach it with more anticipation and hopefully less polarization and politicization. Digital trade is above all predominantly about benefits, and is now becoming an everyday reality and necessity. It represents connectivity that has kept many of us afloat and open during the pandemic, and for many countries like Korea, which is seeking openness, this connectivity is indispensable. Yet we should keep in mind that the bigger picture, that we can be coherent and do not work in silos. And as a policy or rule makers, our core job seems to be remarkably similar, laying out the rules that broaden its positive aspects of digitalization to minimize the negative effects and on a structural level, perhaps narrow the digital divide so that our benefits can be far-reaching and even. In that sense, this side event can be mutually informing and even reinforcing opportunity to compare notes, gain a broad perspective, and learn from each other. Another common challenge is that digitalization is often outpacing regulation. So forethought is now a duty and necessity, not a choice anymore. So although we cannot be always one step ahead, we should at least try not to be two steps behind. So it will be meaningful, therefore, to evaluate the trend of digital economy and map out our strategy together. So again, in light of all these, the role of UNCITRAL is vital in establishing, harmonizing, and universalizing rules related to digital trade. And its progress in this area will have a positive impact in other areas as well. So as we have today outstanding experts and stakeholders in attendance, I look forward to fruitful discussions. And I also hope that this event can raise the awareness of UNCITRAL's role and devotion to digital cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Greetings to all speakers and participants. I'm Athita Kaminder, head of the UNCITRAL Regional Center for Asia and the Pacific, located in Incheon, Republic of Korea. RCAP is UNCITRAL's only regional center and executes UNCITRAL's mandate of furthering the progressive modernization and harmonization of international trade and commercial law in approximately 60 jurisdictions in the Asia Pacific. I'll be moderating this first session on trends in the digital economy, which ambitiously aims to cover in 30 minutes through the insights of 4 distinguished experts from the public and private sectors, issues such as fintech, digital competition, automated contracting, and more. Each speaker has 7 minutes, and I will try to announce when you have 1 minute remaining. So I now turn to our first expert, Mr. Torbjorn Fredriksson, who heads the e-commerce and digital economy branch at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and will present key findings of UNCTAD's Digital Economy Report in the next 7 minutes. Torbjorn, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And let me start by thanking the government of the Republic of Korea and UNCITRAL for inviting UNCTAD to address this important session. So as was mentioned, I'm Torbjorn Fredriksson, and I'm leading UNCTAD's work on e-commerce and the digital economy. I find this event very timely. Digital transformation is evolving more rapidly than ever before, boosted by the pandemic, as was already referred to, which has led to a surge in the use of various digital solutions. We have seen people, companies, and governments turn to teleworking and teleconferencing, like today, to mitigate the disruption posed by social distancing measures and travel restrictions. More people also have gone shopping online to cope with various social distancing problems. And with more digital use, we have also seen a surge in data flows. They grew at their fastest pace in 2020 since 2013. And I will also show that the shift to digital solutions has had an impact also on trade. But before that, let's remind ourselves that far from all parts of the world have been in a position to fully seize the opportunities from digital solutions during the pandemic. Huge digital divides remain in the world, although the share of people using the internet, according to ITU, has increased significantly. In LDCs, only 1 in 4 people still uses the internet. And many low-income countries also lag behind in terms of legal and regulatory frameworks related to the digital economy. And as a consequence, the accelerated uptake of digital technologies may result in widening inequalities rather than acting as the great equalizer. This can already be seen from recent trade developments. First, the increased demand for digitally enabled work and activities translated into more demand for ICT goods. In 2020, global exports of ICT goods rose by 4% to about $2.3 trillion. As a result, the share of ICT goods in global merchandise trade surged from 13% in 2019 to nearly 16% in 2020, the greatest annual increase since 2000. Exports of ICT goods are highly concentrated, though, with East and Southeast Asia accounting for as much as 4/5 of all the global total. Big exporters also saw strong growth in their exports. However, in the least developed countries and in African countries, both exports and imports of ICT goods fell sharply. So in this area, countries with low levels of income and digital readiness fell further behind during the pandemic. Secondly, there have been important developments related to digital trade. It has become more common to make use of this term, as we are doing today. And according to the first edition of the Handbook on Measuring Digital Trade refers to all trade that is digitally ordered, which we normally talk about as e-commerce or cross-border e-commerce, and or digitally delivered. And I'm happy to say that UNCTAD is currently working with colleagues in other international organizations on the second edition of this handbook. Now, when it comes to digitally ordered trade, there's very little data available. In fact, only a handful of countries collect statistics related to cross-border e-commerce. However, with few exceptions, the share of internet users shopping online increased in almost all countries during the pandemic. Moreover, the largest e-commerce platforms saw their sales grow from 2.4 trillion in 2019 to 3.9 trillion in 2021. It's a huge increase in 2 years only. But the level of e-commerce varies greatly again between countries. From 80 to 90% of internet users in advanced economies shopping online to below 10% in many low-income countries. So the share of what we call digitally deliverable services in total services exports also surged from 52% in 2019 to 64% in 2020. Again, regions were differently affected. While the share of digitally deliverable services rose by 14 percentage points on average in developing countries, it rose by only 6 percentage points in least developed countries. A third, increasingly important area concerns the ability to harness digital data and data flows, a topic we focused on in our most recent digital economy report. During the pandemic, the market power of the largest digital platforms was greatly accentuated, and they became even more dominant in all parts of the data value chain, from the collection, transmission, storage of data to the processing and usage of the data. The data-driven digital economy is dominated by two countries in particular, the United States and China, the platforms of which are in a particularly strong place to monetize data. To conclude, digital transformation affects in various ways the entire economy and the whole of society. As it tends to disrupt the status quo, it opens both opportunities and challenges. It creates both winners and losers. Against this background, all countries need to develop the necessary skills and capabilities to engage in and benefit from digital transformations. The ultimate outcome of digital transformation is also greatly influenced by the policies adopted at national, regional, and global levels. It's in this context essential to consider how to better strengthen the international support to developing countries that wish to better harness digital transformation for sustainable development. UNCTAD offers various kinds of support to member states. This includes, for example, the e-trade readiness assessments conducted now for more than 30 countries, e-commerce and law reform assistance, capacity building in the area of measuring e-commerce and the digital economy, and the formulation of relevant national strategies. And to ensure effective delivery of our work, we try to work as closely as possible with our 33 partners of the E-Trade for All initiative that we started in 2016. And I'm very pleased to count UNCITRAL among the founding members of this E-Trade for All initiative. I'll conclude there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Torbjörn, for being so eloquent and precisely on time. Because the Assistant Secretary General is now with us, I would now pass the floor to her.
Thank you so much, indeed. Madam Secretary Anna Zubin-Brett, and Your Excellency Ambassador Jong Hin Bai, ladies and gentlemen, It is a pleasure to join you for this UNCITRAL side event on digital trade, and this session obviously takes place at a very critical time. Over the past couple of years, the COVID-19 pandemic has made clear our dependence on digital technologies, and as mobility restricting measures push the economy interactions online, the pandemic has encouraged an expansion of the digital economy. The rise of digital trade has tremendous economic potential, creating new industries and jobs. But without commensurate policy responses, digital trade will bring uneven outcomes for countries and communities. First of all, countries are not on a level playing field when it comes to participation in digital trade. Digitally deliverable services as a share of total exports are significantly lower in least developed countries and in some developing regions, which reflects the global digital divide. Second, market power concentration in the digital economy has risen during the pandemic, which has adverse consequences for inequality. As globally dominant firms come from only a handful of countries, most countries are exporters of raw data. These firms enjoy significant profit from processing such data and selling services and insights derived from them, without paying enough taxes to countries where the data is originated from. So data is now integral to every sector across all functions of governments and businesses, becoming as essential as physical assets and human resources. The growth of digital trade and the digital economy, coupled with the polarity of social platforms and the rollout of the Internet of Things, results in enormous quantities of data being generated, and we give this data voluntarily most of the time to these platforms. These data, often combined data from different sources, are analyzed using artificial intelligence technologies to gain insights and take decisions. Furthermore, digital trade systems based on AI technology are fed with increasingly large amounts of data to train them in machine learning and automatic decision-making. In this context, there is a wide range of policy issues and concerns directly linked to the collection, management, and use of data. Security, privacy, ethical issues are major concerns, and digital and data literacy and related institutional capacities remain insufficient in many areas, especially in African countries, LDCs, and SIDS. So it is important, we believe, for governments to adopt a holistic national data governance framework in supporting new development of digital trade, maintaining supply chain security in ICT products and services, including data, through regional and global cooperation, and encouraging more data sharing and interoperability, while ensuring data security and privacy. To promote cross-border data flow, which are crucial for digital trade, as you all know, the international community must adequately address the distributional implications of digital trade and especially data transactions. Such efforts would be best served, we believe, by a holistic approach that involves data, competition, and taxation policy. There need to be common global principles for the digital economy and data governance. They cover all parts of the data value chain, including collection, storage, processing, and transfer. It would help to reduce regulatory fragmentation, too, that could bring disproportionate compliance burden on smaller countries and smaller firms. And in this context, UNCITRAL's work on these issues is critical in highlighting key issues to be addressed and signposting the way forward. One approach which UN DESA has encouraged is the development of digital sandboxes and experiments to allow for evidence-based decision-making and adaptive deployment of digital technologies in the pursuit of digital government and sustainable development together. For instance, a sandbox approach is being considered to test an open market model, such as the Open Network for Digital Commerce, an aggregated assisted e-commerce platform. This could help micro, small, and medium enterprises in rural areas to come online by connecting established local and international digital marketplaces. So many of these challenges and proposed measures are contained in the Secretary General report called Our Common Agenda. This report calls for a summit of the futures to take place next year, building on the roadmap for digital cooperation. The technology track of this summit will lead to a global digital compact. I encourage you to provide input to this compact, including your views on how the international community can better support digital trade, including data flows and adequate tax policies. The Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology has a public call for inputs on its website. Indeed, the issue of protect data is highlighted as one potential area that the compact could address. And we are in close contact also, of course, with UNCITRAL Secretariat colleagues to ensure synergies. In addition to the outcomes from today's side event, the 2022 Internet Governance Forum in Ethiopia in November will also have sessions related to the Global Digital Compact, providing additional opportunity for all stakeholders to provide input. I wish you a great session and look forward to your input, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your global perspectives, Madam Assistant Secretary General. Returning to the panel, our second speaker is Mr. Zuyang David Fan, Head of Digital Trade at the World Economic Forum, who co-authored with Ms. Emmanuel Ngan at the World Trade Organization the report on the promise of trade tech, policy approaches to harness trade digitalization, and will highlight the findings for us. Zuyang, you have 7 minutes, please.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Ziyang Fan. I'm the head of digital trade at the World Economic Forum. I'm based in San Francisco. 5 years ago, the forum opened up a center for the fourth industrial revolution to address exactly the issues several speakers have mentioned already, that the speed of technology, especially digital technologies, are moving too fast for policies and governance, and there's a gap. And we work with the private sectors and public sector and international organizations such as the UN to together close that gap by co-design policy framework to address those issues. I lead work on digital trade, which encompasses a wide range of issues from e-commerce to digital payments and etc. In addition, we look at how digital technologies can make global trade and supply chain more efficient and more equal and more inclusive. It's a term we call. And that's the report we have just published with the World Trade Organization in April. And before that, we also worked with the World Customs Organization on an earlier report. What we did is that we worked with companies and governments and civil society and look at what are the impacts of digital technologies for trade. Let me just take a quick overview that technology is not new for global trade, from the invention of compass, from steam engine to the containers in the 1950s. However, what we see differently this time around is really the speed. The technologies that, everything from artificial intelligence, IoT, to digital currencies, what would that mean for the trade system? So what we found in the report is that we focus on the 5 areas of trade tech. First is on global data transmission and liability networks, which is really one, we need a global infrastructure, digital infrastructure, before we talk about how to benefit and how to reap the advantages of technologies, which is still a challenging issue in both developed and developing countries. And 2 is cross-border data flows that several of the speakers have mentioned. 2, the second area we focused was on the legal recognition of electronic documents, which included e-signature and trusted services, transferable documents, automated contracts, and also tokenization, and how to, for example, using NFTs for trade finance. And in this area, UNCITRAL has always been playing such an important role. I really want to give UNCITRAL a round of applause and recognition. For example, the model law on electronic transferable records, on electronic signatures. And I heard from Madame that earlier today the identity management model law was passed. So all those will play such an important role in pushing for more legal recognition of electronic documents. Because at the end of the day, those are building the foundations before we get to the artificial intelligence, blockchain, all the new technologies can make the trade more efficient. We need the basics, right? We need to turn the hundreds of pages of trade documents, physical paper documents, into digital, right? That's the first step. And then we need countries to recognize that, to recognize the effect of digital documents and digital signatures and etc. Then on top of that, we can really capitalize some of the new technologies we have been exploring. So I mentioned the first 2 on data flows, on legal recognition of e-documents. The third area was universal digital identity. Again, I mentioned the UNCITRAL's new trusted identity management. That will be a fantastic addition to what we've been looking at. For digital identity, I just want to mention there's both digital identity of natural and legal persons, and the physical and digital identity of physical and digital objects. Both are equally important. The fourth issue that we look at was the universal interoperability. From the platforms and the different standardization and initiatives for e-trade documents and processes, from e-invoicing to government procurement documents. The last but not least was really the global trade rules access and computational law, and how the trade agreements and international coordination could help. For example, trade agreements could encourage governments to publish official machine executable packages of trade policies, or to develop a body of computational law beyond our current trade provisions. So the report is available online on both the website of the World Trade Organization and the World Economic Forum. We really look forward to working with everyone to advance those issues. In closing, let me just say that the challenges for trade adoption are numerous. It's not a straight line to digitization of trade, from regulatory fragmentation, I think many of you have mentioned already, to the cost, especially for developing and LDCs to adopt the different technologies, and to training, human capital and understanding and skills, which is all extremely important, and also to jobs, right? We want to create more jobs. So all those issues would require organizations such as you and UNCITRAL to really help driving the effort, and we stand ready to work with everyone from private sector to public sector and the international organization to make using digital technology to make trade more inclusive, efficient, and equitable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your practical and legal insights, Siyang. Could we invite you to maybe put a link to the report in the chat so everyone could look on it? Thank you very much. Thank you. Next up is Ms. Barbara Kochwar, Executive Director of the Visa Economic Empowerment Institute. Dr. Kochwar heads a team of experts in the fields of payments, economic policy, technology, and security working to advance digital equity and inclusion, and will present the view from industry for us lucky folks today. You have 7 minutes, please, Barbara.
Thank you very much. I'll try to stay within the 7 minutes. But first of all, I'd like to thank the government of the Republic of Korea and UNCITRAL for inviting me to this important meeting. In my former life as a trade economist, providing technical assistance to governments in the areas of trade and investment, I've seen firsthand the importance of the work that UNCITRAL does in providing the legal infrastructure within which trade agreements work. So I really appreciate your reaching out to the private sector to hear our insights on digital trade agreements, a subject that can sometimes sound theoretical, but actually has tremendous real-world importance, and increasingly so. In my current role at Visa, I have a new view from the ground up, the importance of a good legal framework for digital trade. Visa is a global network that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to connect consumers and businesses in more than 200 countries and territories around the world. And so we see many effects of different policies. Our network is able to authorize up to 30,000 transaction messages per second, and we rely on the free flow of data to enable these connections and to keep them secure. And we're always looking for ways to make the payments experience more efficient and secure, and digital trade policy is a big and increasingly large part of that. As more commerce moves online, there's also more risk, and I think that's been alluded to in other presentations. Fraudsters have figured out that cybercrime can be a pretty lucrative pursuit. With hacking, they don't need weapons or disguises or getaway cars to steal money. They just need a laptop. Visa is dead set on fighting fraud and cybercrime. In our last fiscal year, 180 billion payment transactions ran on our network. We were able to keep fraud rates at less than 0.1% of those volumes. But these results are predicated on our access to data, and to data that flows across borders. We have an entire team of cyber experts dedicated to what we call payment fraud disruptions. And they use fraud detection algorithms that combine data from all over the world to stop patterns that span multiple markets at once. So their ability to be successful and protect the money that's flowing across borders depends on having consistent access to cross-border data. So digital policy is obviously important for companies like Visa that are global in scope and whose core business relies on digital flows. But the real impact is from its importance to the businesses and the people that we connect. And many of the over 100 million merchant locations that are connected to our network across the globe see tremendous benefits from the ability to scale into international markets. This is even more important for small businesses who've suffered the brunt of economic costs from the pandemic, but for whom digitization can hold great hope. And this is small businesses both in developed countries, but more importantly in developing countries. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the shift from in-person to digital commerce, making e-commerce a lifeline, potentially, especially for smaller companies. At the Visa Institute, we've done research over the past 2 years that shows how digital trade can unlock new growth opportunities for micro, small, and medium enterprises. And we found in our surveys that small firms across the world value digitization, including access to online exports, over getting additional grants and loans. I think that's pretty telling. Digital technology can also help to level the playing field. Businesses of all sizes in emerging markets, as well as in higher income countries, are now potentially able to more effectively access markets across the world. A designer is able to sell her consulting services from her laptop in Ghana to clients in Ireland or Colombia or the Republic of Korea. As Mr. Frederickson pointed out, however, far from everybody has been able to take advantage of these opportunities. And so for this reason, Visa is committed to helping 50 million small businesses become digitally enabled by 2023. But these digitized businesses need an open trade system in order to be able to succeed. We've also looked at the impact on digital inclusion. During the pandemic, we found that the number of small women-owned businesses grew in many geographies. And in our sample of small businesses across the world, we see that businesses born during the pandemic are much more likely to be led by a woman than before, for many different reasons. When we looked at the factors behind the successfully growing women-led firms, we found 3 keys to success. 1, they're more likely to use digital payments. 2, they're more likely to sell on global marketplaces. And 3, they're more likely to export. So digital trade policy is good small business policy. And if policymakers successfully address some of the domestic barriers that still remain to women-owned businesses, a good digital trade policy can also help us along the path to greater gender equity. Of course, all of this is important to private sector development, but digital trade flows also benefit countries as a whole, which is why it's worrying to see a growing trend of policies that aim to restrict cross-border data flows. The ITIF, in a report last year, found that as of the middle of last year, 62 countries had imposed 144 restrictions, and dozens more are under consideration. So that trend makes events like this one even more pressing. Research by the European Center for Political Economy finds strong, significant evidence of a dampening effect on productivity of cross-border restrictions. The ITIF found that a 1-point increase in a nation's data restrictiveness cut its gross trade output by 7% and slows its productivity by nearly 3%. Today's economic environment makes these numbers more sobering and the need to counter this loss more important. So I'd love to take this opportunity to really focus on what Visa sees as global best practices when it comes to creating policy frameworks to support digital trade, which is what you do best. I won't go into many specifics because the authors of some of the best practices in this space are speaking on the following panel. My friend Siang from the World Economic Forum is also doing some path-breaking work in this area. A few years ago, partnered to publish a report on how to advance digital trade. But there are some important principles. We believe global commerce works best when there are open, accessible, and secure data flows. Interoperable networks and good modern trade agreements can help facilitate this. We're fortunate that we're already seeing some examples of positive measures that spur innovation, technological collaboration, and strengthen data security, all the while protecting personal data. These agreements prohibit data localization requirements and ensure cross-border data flows. And we can't underscore too much the importance of international organizations and organizations such as the World Economic Forum in helping to educate policymakers on the costs and benefits of good data policies. Now, equally important that these commitments be of prohibiting these restrictions is that these commitments, and this is echoing some of the really important points made by the Assistant Secretary General, these commitments need to be respectful of and sit alongside appropriate domestic policies that protect privacy and citizens' personal data, even when transferred to another country. In the post-COVID digital age, and as we emerge out of the pandemic, our shared prosperity depends on staying connected and working together to solve problems. We at Visa would be very happy to continue to be part of these discussions, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists. And thank you again for inviting me to this discussion.
Thank you for your expert views from industry, Barbara, including the benefits to MSMEs, which is one of the core areas of UNCITRAL's work. The final speaker of this first session is Ms. Marilia Maciel, who heads Digital Commerce and Internet Policy at Diplo Foundation. Ms. Maciel has 15 years of experience in the area of digital governance, the digital economy, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence, and will share her insights pertaining to digital trade policy for the next 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. On behalf of DEPA, I would like to thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I also take the opportunity to congratulate UNCITRAL for the conclusion of the model law today, which is another important step laying the ground of a law harmonization in the field of trade. As we have discussed, economic integration in the digital economy is happening in global value chains through the increased participation of SMEs in e-commerce. But this integration is happening at very different speeds, leaving us with an overall picture of fragmentation. Firstly, interestingly enough, fragmentation comes from concentration. Concentration not only of the key assets of the digital economy, such as data sets, servers, market capitalization, as we have heard from UNCTAD, but also concentration within digital business sectors. A 2020 report that has been published by the Internet Society shows that there is a currently vertical and horizontal concentration in all layers of the Internet, from infrastructure to standards development to applications. And as a consequence of this concentration of assets and markets as well, there's a growing concentration of wealth generated by the digital economy. The World Economic Forum publishes a yearly report dedicated to identifying the main risks to global stability. And in 2021, for the first time, a concentration in the digital economy was ranked in the top 10 threats to global stability, to the stability not only in a security sense, but also to the stability of our economies and of our democracies. This shows that concentration is a problem for developing countries and developed countries alike. These different types of concentration lead to fragmentation because they create a stark separation between actors that can reasonably expect to ride waves of digital transformation that lead to Industry 4.0, that lead to the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution, and those that have the clear impression that they are being left behind. It creates a stark division between countries and players that start to plan and take active steps to exploit Web3 and the metaverse, and those that are struggling to even have access to basic connectivity. And this concentration has been made worse by COVID, in spite of initial all across the board acceleration of e-commerce. A recent study from the International Monetary Fund shows that half of the countries, the share of e-commerce is now either at or below the predicted pre-COVID trend levels. And the study also shows that the level of e-commerce growth increased proportionally more in countries that already had a higher pre-COVID share of online transactions. And this has exacerbated the digital divide across economies. So in this context, it is our responsibility, governmental actors, non-governmental actors, in accordance to our roles and responsibilities to design international policy on trade and cooperation on economic issues in general in a way that will effectively tackle these growing divides. The sharing of wealth in the digital economy, which is highly concentrated, is a big elephant in the room today that needs to be tackled if we want to have a free, frank conversation on how to put free data flows in place among different jurisdictions today. So that leads me to the second fragmentation, which I hope will provide a transition to the upcoming panel, which is the regulatory fragmentation. The regulation in the digital economy today is made through digital trade agreements. These agreements are the building blocks of the digital economic order. And it is possible to notice today a few interesting developments in the field of trade agreements. On the one hand, we have some trade agreements that are very advanced, including state-of-the-art policy issues, such as identity management, artificial intelligence data flows, mostly between countries in the Asia Pacific. or among these countries and their counterparts in different regions. I'm talking about the Digital Economy Partnership, for example. One consequence of this is that the center of gravity when it comes to norm making in a digital economy has shifted from the United States and Europe to the Asia Pacific. But at the same time, we see the completely opposite picture in the Global South. If we look at trade agreements celebrated by countries in the Global South between them, they barely cover e-commerce. And among the ones that have a chapter on e-commerce, they barely cover provisions on issues such as data flows, for example. So in regulatory terms, we see that a clear fragmented picture is emerging. At the same time, we have mega regional trade agreements such as CPTPP and RCAP that have highly influenced negotiations on e-commerce taking place at the WTO, covering a broad range of digital issues that used to be discussed as internet governance issues, such as data protection, cybersecurity, network neutrality. And unfortunately, this is happening without creating the necessary bridges between organizations and policy processes that used to discuss these digital issues and the trade organizations that are now tackling them. Network neutrality is a clear example. We have a long tradition of discussion of this issue in the Internet Governance Forum, but this discussion has not percolated in the WTO negotiations, for example. Next year, we will have the UN Digital Future Summit, continuing the important efforts crystallized in the roadmap on digital cooperation, and that has been advanced under the leadership of the UN Secretary General. So better coordinating the digital issues within the UN system and with other close international organizations should be an important topic on the agenda of the discussions that we will have next year. To conclude, I just would like to stress the role that capacity building plays when it comes to developing trade policy and trade negotiations. It is very important to provide the conditions for trade negotiators and regulators from developing countries and LDCs to be able to really voice their concerns and their development-oriented priorities in negotiations. And this is the only way that we'll have more fair and balanced trade agreements and more open space to discuss issues such as data flows from a level playing field, as many speakers highlighted before. Thank you very much for the opportunity and for the attention today.
Thank you very much to Marilia and all speakers. This was a fascinating opening segment, which, as Marilia observed, perfectly sets the stage for the session on international agreements on digital trade, moderated by my colleague, Alex Kunzelman, legal officer at UNCITRAL in Vienna. So, Alex, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Athita, and it's a pleasure to be here. I would like to again thank our hosts, the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea, for supporting this event. As the Secretary of UNCITRAL mentioned before, this is auspiciously timed, this event, because only this morning we had some key developments in UNCITRAL's work in this area, occurring with the adoption of model law, but also with the agreements on future work in this space. So it's good that we're getting this wealth of information from this first panel to set the scene also for that work. But I would like to just, while we have two of our four panelists, I'm delighted that we have them in person, and also for the two panelists online. Just a quick few comments to make is that the Commission this morning emphasised the need for future work in UNCITRAL to complement these other international work being done in international forums, as well as within the United Nations system. And it is here that I'm absolutely delighted that we have representatives from 4 jurisdictions that have been particularly active in developing, and if I can use your term, Marilia, from the first panel, state-of-the-art digital trade agreements. So it's quite a treat for us that we have representatives here from Singapore, Japan, Chile, and the Republic of Korea to talk to us about these new international agreements dealing with digital trade. as we also heard earlier from Torbjörn Fredriksson, there are broad policy issues that are being considered in these contexts, and the issue for UNCITRAL really is to find out how our work can plug in to this work. And in particular, here I was very interested to hear Barbara's term about legal infrastructure, and essentially how UNCITRAL can provide the digital infrastructure to plug into some areas of these digital trade agreements, mindful, of course, that they do cover a wide range of policy areas, including infrastructure for IT, etc. So that's enough from me. I am delighted to present our first speaker, Mr. Wei Guo Tang from the Permanent Mission of Singapore to the WTO. I would otherwise be providing a quick bio, but here I think we can launch straight into it. I believe we have Wei Guo connected, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I hope everyone can hear me. Warm greetings from Geneva. And before I start, I would really like to express my thanks to the organizers for the kind invitation and their warm introduction. Before I begin, I would like to also introduce the team which I'm a part of. So at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, there is a digital economy team that was set up to drive Singapore's engagement strategy with key partners on digital economy issues with cross-border implications, including digital trade facilitation, cross-border data flows, and emerging issues like artificial intelligence governance via a range of modalities. So I'll basically address 3 quick questions on the what, the why, and the how. So first, let me briefly run through what are digital economy agreements. And in gist, the DEAs are international agreements that are focused exclusively on digital issues. So for context, e-commerce or digital trade provisions in existing trade agreements typically seek to ensure that electronic equivalents of documents and procedures used to facilitate trade of products that are traded do not face undue restrictions. And this ranges from customs documentation to signatures to digital products and data. And together, these commitments by countries help to create an open, trusted global digital commons that unlock more opportunities for all countries, large and small, companies and individuals alike. So the next question, why are we pursuing them? So needless to say, there are numerous opportunities brought about by the rise of the digital economy, and we need to remain nimble and adapt in order to tap on these growth trends. They are very well elaborated by our colleagues and in the first session. And just to give a bit more flavor to Singapore's regional context, the Southeast Asia's digital economy is estimated to double to about $363 billion in 2025 and reach about $1 trillion by 2030. So in order to ride on these opportunities, we will need to also importantly address some of the issues that will hamper the growth. And I think 2 of the issues that have been raised by the previous speakers would be 1, the lack of interoperability and fragmented regulations across digital standards, data flows, personal data protection, and new technologies. And the second obstacle would be the bifurcation in the digital sphere and countries turning protectionist in digital trade with, for instance, data localization regulations. So in this context, we would need to contemplate how to bring the trade policy into the digital era and address emerging issues as our existing international trade rules catered more to a world of physical goods and services. So the most important question which I will spend the most time on is how does Singapore then forge these digital economy agreements? So our approach to our DEAs is essentially 3-pronged. And given how quickly technology evolves, it is important that we take a collaborative approach because we acknowledge that no one has all the answers. And further, we could still be developing or testing policies or frameworks in some of these emerging areas. And we are not ready to take on perhaps binding commitments. So within Singapore, the digital economy agreements are essentially a whole of government effort, with each agency bringing their own experience and expertise to the table. So for instance, we look to the Ministry of Communications and Information and Infocom Media Development Authority for advice on issues like AI governance or data protection. Importantly, we also consult companies, big and small, to better understand how the digital economy agreements can support their businesses and operations across borders, and to ensure that our digital economy agreement modules reflect commercial realities and the interests of our businesses. And third, we work together very closely with countries, developed and developing both alike, to set rules and cooperate on pioneering projects. So bilaterally, we have digital economy agreements with Australia, South Korea, and the UK. Plurilaterally, we have the DEPA together with Chile and New Zealand. And the DEPA is the first result of this collaborative approach. It was signed with Chile and New Zealand in June 2020. And it has now seen interest from Korea, China, and Canada. Multilaterally at the WTO, where I'm based right now, we are the co-conveners of the Joint Statement Initiative on E-commerce with Japan and Australia to steer baseline rules making on digital trade. And on this note, I would like to emphasize that the co-conveners recognize the importance of digital capacity building, which I think has been emphasized previously by speakers in the first session. And we have launched the capacity building framework, looking to how to provide targeted support for developing countries to make sure that they are well equipped with the right knowledge to actually participate in these negotiations. So in terms of agreements, it's very hard to come up with a definitive negotiating outcome today and then say that it will stand the test of time. Because in some areas, we may have sufficient clarity and certainty to anchor legally binding commitments in an agreement, but in other areas, it may be still too nascent, and we may only be ready for dialogues to share experiences and information. So our DEAs are designed as modular and living agreements, which we can add on as new issues and approaches emerge, and they're supplemented by specific cooperation projects. So in closing, perhaps let me just recap what Singapore hopes to achieve through our digital economy agreements. We hope to deepen and strengthen existing disciplines on e-commerce in our FTAs. We hope to foster cooperation on emerging issues that are intrinsic to the digital domain and affect digital trade, such as IDs, e-payment, data protection, AI. And last, really to bridge the digital divide. And that's something that I hope that everyone can take away from our presentation. Thank you very much again for the invitation. Thanks.
Guo, thank you so much for that overview. I have to say also, thank you very much for the timeliness of your presentation. You covered a lot in that, and it's I managed to take some notes. But I have to say, right at the start, the one thing that I suppose heard very loudly is the two comments you made about the lack of interoperability and regulatory fragmentation, and the data localization and protectionism. And these are, particularly the first one, is something that we listen to carefully at UNCITRAL to see how we can do our bit towards overcoming these fragmentary the effects through our mission in harmonizing. So that was very helpful. And one thing to note is that we are monitoring very closely the JSI on e-commerce that Singapore is co-convening. So very interesting to having that latest update of what's at stake. So with that, I'm now delighted to hand over to our second speaker, Ms. Maiko Meguro, who is from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI, with which we work closely at UNCITRAL and have indeed shared experiences through the work that they have done on data contracts. And in particular, I think, Ms. Meguro, we came across you previously with the expert group on preliminary or exploratory work that we had done in this field. So it's wonderful to have you back to UNCITRAL. And with that, I'll pass the floor over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for UNCITRAL to invite me to speak in this side event to discuss important dimension of digital economy. So in the next several minutes, I will be speaking about non-trade approach to enhance the cross-border free flow of data through the materializing the concept of data free flow with trust. So data free flow with trust, for those who do not know the concept, I'd like to have a short explanation. It is a concept to highlight the cross-border free flow of data is only way which can enhance enhance the cross-border free flow of data, and this means that data flow only when there is a trust across the different data subjects by ensuring the protection of privacy, security, intellectual property, and other regulatory demands in different jurisdictions. So this concept was proposed in 2019 at the G20 summit held at Osaka. And from that time, basically the rulemaking, trade rulemaking on electric commerce at WTO and EPA, FTAs has been a major work track to enhance and materialize this concept of DFFT. So for this track, this is namely tackling the various national regulations that set the data localization requirements, obliging the businesses and other data handling actors to store the data generated within the territory, or prohibit to take out this data, or basically they prohibit access to the data outside of their borders. And this type of regulation basically sets a significant and real problems for the business and others whose operations are premised on the cross-border or free connection or flow of data cross-border basis. But meanwhile, it is also becoming clearer that the barriers that these businesses face in daily operation is not only the conventional localization issues, which is basically tackled by ongoing trade rulemaking efforts. So Ministry of Economy conducted a robust study with expert group on this DFFT. We discovered that businesses are really actually facing a variety of challenges hampering the cross-border data flow, including but not only limited to the conventional localization issues. For example, many businesses mention that they're happy to abide by the rule which is set by the national governments, whereas they're really having the issue with lack of transparency, with increasing number of regulations, combined with different guidelines, interpretative agreement, and some of them are not even translated in English. So they're really trying to have the overview of the obligation that they have to abide by in operating a business in a certain jurisdiction. However, they're really having the issue of rising the compliance costs there. And also many of them mentioned that overlapping of the scope and requirements by the different regulation within one country is also an issue. And also we government must admit that sometimes one ministry do not know what the other ministry is actually setting on the businesses in terms of cross-border free flow of data. Also, some also complain that regulators really take into account the up-to-date business customs in governing allocation of data. And some even mentioned that there are emerging technological options which may make some of the regulatory requirements almost nonsense. And because of these regulations do not take into account those reality of businesses and technologies, they even mentioned that they are actually having the issue that they can't choose the effective governance or effective technological choices, even though these do have the effect to the goal which regulation is really trying to protect, while the requirement which leads to these goals set by the regulation are not really meeting those realities. I mean, I could go on more, but I stop here as time is limited. So in short, these voices mainly boils down to the lack of transparency and lack of interoperability across the different data governance approaches is the immediate problem that they see in doing their businesses in daily basis. So what we could say now is that these myriad of challenges are equally significant and problematic to those conventional localization issues, which has been tackled by the trade negotiations. Where we see that need of the additional approach other than this trade agreement so we see that we need to have this additional approach other than the trade agreement to directly cope with the challenges. And also I mean, I'm not saying that hard rules are not effective. Hard rules remain the priority and are critical to advance an open and digital economy, and also prevent what I call balkanization of the data. Whereas I must say that those progress of trade negotiation is sometimes slightly slow, whereas these businesses or these businesses in this using data are quite fast developing, and technology and also business choices are also developing so quickly. And I'm not saying that trade negotiations are too slow, but because these trade negotiations, the outcome of these trade rules do directly forces the domestic regulation to change. And I understand that this takes time because still the approaches and also priorities regarding the protection of personal data, security, and other regulatory demands is quite diverse among the countries. But turning to the businesses, we definitely need to do something to enhance the cross-border free flow of data now. So we propose that we start from, I would say, smaller steps, which we propose that we should focus more on the transparency and interoperability issues by unearthing the variety of policy options from regulatory cooperation or certain international arrangement to perhaps make the list of regulation hampering the cross-border data flow publicly available, so businesses can easily have the overview of what the regulation they have to abide by, or even certain, we could say that certain technological solutions in private sectors to how can I say, we should highlight the certain technological solutions in the private sectors in a more systematic manner, together with certain institutional arrangement to make sure that these policies are implemented. So again, we should have this sort of additional approaches in complementary manner with trade negotiations. And the Japanese government is actually thinking to propose this new additional approach, which is, we call them pragmatically tackling the barriers which are faced by the businesses now. This approach, where we're trying to propose this at the G7, which is coming up in 2023 under our presidency. And perhaps we should discuss these matters, even other forums like G20, APEC, to see that what we can do right now to really enhance the cross-border free flow of data under the heading that we need a trust and we need to materialize a trust, and we really have to find a real set of policy options which we can really have the good balance between the protection of privacy, protection of security, and the benefit of having the cross-border free flow of data. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate that the opportunity that we have to speak here by UNCITRAL. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maiko. And I think those final points are a very good way to bring it back actually to the UNCITRAL forum. I noticed you mentioned the pragmatic approach to tackling some of these barriers, and certainly we were reminded this morning in the Commission of the importance of having a similar approach here at UNCITRAL, and I think as a forum that can also pick up that challenge that you had mentioned, and I would just flag that I found very telling from what you said is the involvement and the consultation you had with businesses, what they require, what they need, and that is a message that is also coming to us here at UNCITRAL. So very much appreciate the feedback from that consultation process that you have undertaken. Now we move to the in-person segment, shall we say, of this session, and I am delighted to introduce next to me Ms. Pierina Giachetti Guzman, who joins us from the government of Chile, legal advisor to the Inversion Services and Digital Economy Division of the Undersecretariat of International Economic Affairs in charge of negotiating free trade agreements. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. The floor is all yours, and I have my timer as well, but the first two speakers were fantastic at keeping to time. I'm not, so over to you.
Thank you, Alexander, and all the distinguished delegations. I also would like to especially thank the Secretary for coordinating this side event and for inviting us to learn and share the different agreements that UNCITRAL members have been working on, which undoubtedly constitute an important step forward in the digital economy. Chile believes that the digitalization of the economy generates opportunities to democratize the participation of the population in global trade, making it easier for business and consumers to take advantage of the opportunities presented by electronic commerce. In that sense, we consider digital trade as an essential pillar of the global economy. This dynamism of the digital economy is key for the commercial exchange between countries. As a matter of fact, in the last 10 years, global cross-border e-commerce has grown at an average annual rate of 20%. Of its sales channel is and it expected to grow at 52% between now and year 2025, making clear the immense potential for the development of digital technology in the internationalization of our economy. Furthermore, if we look in particular at the situation in Chile, in 2020, companies, retail, government, universities, banking, health, and of course households made great efforts to digitalize several of their activities, which raised internet connections to record numbers reaching 23.7 million connections, 24% of which were done through mobile devices. The notorious effect of the pandemic on digitalization process must also be noted. Without going any further, from March 2020 onwards, about 3 million internet connections have been added in our country. Thus, the financial services industry, ICTs, digital infrastructure, and the logistic chain have supported each other, allowing our economy and our companies to continue operating despite the complex national and international scenario. Considering this context, it is a priority that as a government, we can generate the condition and ecosystem so that the digital economy can grow on solid foundations, both within our borders and outside them. In this sense, that the idea of negotiation emerged, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, DEPA for its acronym in English, is a treaty between Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore, a pioneer agreement of its kind which seeks to promote collaboration in the field of digital economy by establishing a regulatory and cooperation framework that allows the parties to promote their digital markets. The text of the agreement consists of 16 modules and 4 annexes, where topics such as artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, fintech, digital inclusion, and open development models are incorporated. DEPA establishes cooperation frameworks that allows promoting innovation and creativity, the dissemination of information, knowledge, technology, culture, and the arts, thus creating open, inclusive, and competitive markets. And as I said before, it is a pioneer agreement since in addition to covering traditional disciplines such as electronic signature, electronic payments, and paperless trade, among others, it includes new topics that cannot be found in our e-commerce chapters, mainly with a collaborative approach. In that context, in terms of the new trade-related issues, DEPA contemplates articles relating to digital products and data, establishing, for example, a moratorium and no discrimination provision that sets the compromise of consolidating the moratorium of no imposing custom duties to electronic transmission and the no discrimination of digital products. Another example of this as well is the provision of encryptation. Discipline on cryptography focuses on the fact that the parties may not require access codes when importing products that have cryptographic technology. It considers too a commitment regarding data protection, establishing that the general principles of personal data protection set by the OECD are recognized, in addition to encouraging the internal adoption of the highest international standards. In that sense, the parties undertake that their data protection policies are not discriminatory and that the interoperability between the different data protection systems is promoted. Thus, to complement the provisions that I've already mentioned, DEPA promotes free flow of data and a non-localization requirement provision to avoid the forced localization of servers. On the other hand, and in an attempt to promote a trust ecosystem among the parties, cooperation in cybersecurity is maintained, encouraging the competent agencies to share good practices with their counterparts in other countries. It is specified, actually, that the opinions of all participants in the digital economy must be taken into account to face cybersecurity and online security issues. Furthermore, consumer protection articles that we have been including in other commercial agreements were included too on DEPA. For example, it was settled that member countries must adopt or maintain regulations that prevent misconduct in electronic commerce, which can lead consumers and companies to misunderstandings. I should also be noted that the DEPA aims through its articles to enhance new trends and emerging technologies too. To this end, it has certain provisions that, such as its cooperation article, that promotes the development of the fintech sector in the parties to the agreement. It seeks to establish cooperation frameworks that allows entrepreneurs in the sector from each party to interact with each other. It recognizes too the importance of the development of artificial intelligence technologies, very important for UNCITRAL too, and seeks to promote the generation of ethical and governance frameworks that allows the development of this technology in a reliable, safe, and responsible manner. For this, it aims to follow internationally recognized guidelines on artificial intelligence, such as the one set by the OECD. On other hand, we cannot fail to point out that DEPA establishes a framework for cooperation to foster innovation and creativity in the digital economy by establishing disciplines on public domain, data innovation, and government data, open government data, and as well, it allows the cooperation on MSME issues. One of the main objectives of this agreement is to support MSMEs. So this model seeks to promote cooperation between the competent agencies. These parties will share information and how the benefits of this agreement can be used in an easy and accessible way. This information may include topics such as custom regulation, procedures, or contact points regulation regarding data flows and innovation. To this end, also is the creation of a dialogue on digital MSMEs, which includes the private sector and the civil society, and the objectives of this dialogue will be the promotion, of course, of the digital economy through the use of the DEPA. Having all this said, very long, but I hope it was useful to you. I'm being very grateful for this opportunity to promote this agreement, which is so important to Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore, and which will undoubtedly help our current process of economic reactivation and become a tool to promote electronic commerce and the digital economy in times of uncertainty, establishing clear rules with a forward-looking perspective. We are looking forward to receive your inputs on our agreement, and to any questions that you may have, we will gladly answer in this instance or in another one. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for that cross-cutting, if I may, overview of the DEPA. I'm very mindful of time. I'm going to hand over immediately to Mr. Jung-Hyun Park. Chris, you have the floor, and I'm told that we might have to shave a couple of minutes off your presentation. I do apologize. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Kunzelman. I will try to make it short. Negotiations on rules for digital trade have been conducted on two pillars. One is the negotiations in the WTO or between countries to conclude digital trade agreements governing the public aspects of international trade law. The other is UNCITRAL's rulemaking, primarily on electronic commerce, which has recently developed into digital trade or digital economy. WTO members have continued to work on digital trade agreements under the 1998 work program on e-commerce for a long time at the multilateral level. In the meantime, developments occurred first at the bilateral or regional level. Some countries included chapters for digital trade in their regional trade agreements, and the other countries concluded standalone agreements on digital trade. Meanwhile, UNCITRAL has been busy with its work on e-commerce, specifically model law on electronic commerce, model law on electronic signature, UN Convention on the use of electronic communications in international contracts, and more recently, model law on electronic transferable records. One question arises here. Since both digital trade agreements and UNCITRAL's work aim to create legal instruments for digital trade, they are likely to be related in some respects. Then, how are they connected? In other words, where does UNCITRAL encounter digital trade agreements? I will show you this from Korea's experience. We found several provisions in Korea's existing FTAs that connect the two sides. For example, the FTA between Korea and Australia includes an article concerning domestic regulations in the e-commerce chapter. Article 15.4 provides that each party shall adopt or maintain measures regulating electronic commerce, taking into account the UNCITRAL model law on electronic commerce and, as appropriate, other international standards. The Korea-Vietnam FTA also has a similar provision for domestic regulatory frameworks. A more recent example is the Korea-Singapore Digital Partnership Agreement. It includes an article for domestic electronic transactions framework, referring to the most of the existing UNCITRAL rules on e-commerce. Based on our observation, the contact area between UNCITRAL's work regarding digital trade, including e-commerce, and the digital trade agreements is not very wide. This is why I use the word encounter to describe the current situation. However, it should be noted that their encounter has a considerable meaning in terms of legal effect. UNCITRAL's works and the digital trade agreements can be complementary, from my view. Under the aforementioned provisions, the parties to the regional or digital trade agreements shall take into account UNCITRAL's works, including the convention and the model laws regarding electronic commerce, when they adopt or maintain domestic laws and regulations governing electronic transactions. The model laws, as such, are not legally binding, but when connected to a provision under e-commerce chapter in the FTAs or under digital trade agreements as above, the parties to the agreements shall consider the model laws when adopting or maintaining their domestic legal framework. In this way, the model laws could have a de facto binding effect, so to speak. I think that the connection between the two sides would be wider and stronger. This would make the UNCITRAL's works on digital trade more meaningful and more practical. In this regard, it could be noted that discussions on electronic transactions frameworks are in the progress in the WTO. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. What a perfect place then to hand back over to the Secretary for concluding remarks. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much indeed to all the panelists and to all of you for joining us for this side event, which has left us with a number of very important messages. One that is definitely the role of UNCITRAL in developing infrastructure, legal infrastructure on which this international cooperation in the digital economy can be built. It can also contribute to more certainty. We heard a lot about trust. We heard a lot about fragmentation. And I'm quite confident that the way we work in UNCITRAL is both the best way for building capacity and understanding for those who participate and for receiving in these working groups, these different views that then further build understanding and build capacity. So it's a complete win-win, as we like to say in Asia. And with these messages received loud and clear, I would just once again like to thank our hosts or co-hosts, the permanent mission of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations, Ambassador Jong-in Bae, and all of you for being here with us. Thank you very much, and let's join the meeting room now for the last festivities of the day. Thank you very much.